Hello everyone, welcome to the new session of Principle of Weed Control. So in this session we are going to study about what are weeds. So there will be an introduction to weeds, right? What plants are called as weeds that we are going to study. Then there will be weed control. So how to control these weeds. So we are having three different methods: prevention method, eradication method and control method. So that we are going to study about in this particular session. So let us start. So what are weeds, right? In natural habitat, there are four types of plants we see. What are those plants? Crop plants, right? Wild plants, rug plants and weed plants. So the crop plant that is grown in the agriculture field, and that is a desired plant that we are growing in the agriculture field. Wild plants that grows in the wild in nature, and they sometimes occur in our agriculture field also, right? Rug plants are those plants that are having the bright flowers, and they grow in generally shade region, okay? And the weed plants that are not required, unwanted plants, right? But they grow by themselves, right? So those are called as weed plants. So these four different types of plants we see in the natural habitat. Crop plants are those which are intensively cultivated by man for his welfare. So we required food, and for that we cultivate in our agricultural field, and the plants that are grown are called as crop plants, right? Wild plants are those which are grown voluntarily in nature in an uncontrolled way and do not interfere with the man's activities. So they are not interfering any man activities, and they are also uncontrolled. They can grow, right? They can grow voluntarily by themselves. Ruts are off-type economic crop plants in the same crop field. So sometimes there are some other economic crop plants that are grown in the crop fields. Weeds are those plants which are out of place, unwanted. So we do not want these plants to grow in our field. Non-useful, often prolific and persistent, competitive, harmful, even sometimes they are poisonous in nature, which interfere with the agricultural operations, means they alter our agricultural operation, they hinder our agricultural operations, and they also sometimes lower down the production of our crop. They also increases the labor, add to cost, reduce yields and detract from the comforts of life. So these are basically the unwanted plants that grow by themselves in the cropland. They are of no use, non-useful. Okay, often prolific and persistent. They can grow very instantly, right? And they are persistent sometime. They are competitive. They compete with the crop plants for nutritive absorption from the soil, for water absorption from the soil, for sunlight absorption. So they are competitive in nature. They are quite harmful. Sometimes they release some poisonous substances that are causing lots of harm to our crop plants. They interfere with the agricultural operations as well, right? So taking out these wild crops from our agricultural field is required a labor, and that also added to our cost of agriculture, right? They sometimes reduce the yield of our crop plant because they are competitive in nature. So our crop will not get all the nutrients, all the water that is supplied to the cropland, because there are some weed plants that compete for these nutrient and water. Each weed scientist has a clear understanding of the term, but there is no universal definition that is accepted by all scientists. So there are so many scientists, they have given their own definition, but there is no definition that we can say that this is the universal definition. But we all understand what is the meaning of weed. So according to the Jayakumar and Jagannathan, defined weed as unwanted and undesirable plant. These are unwanted and undesirable plant that interfere with the utilization of land and water resources and thus adversely affect crop production and human welfare. So they are interfering with the utilization of land and water surfaces. Utilization of land means they are absorbing the nutrient material that we are providing to grow crop. They are absorbing the water that is present in the soil that we have given to grow our crop, right? So they are adversely affecting the production of the crop and also human welfare, because we are producing these crops for ourselves, and these undesirable plants, unwanted plants are taking all the nutrients from them and they are competing with the crop. So that is why they are affecting the human welfare as well. In a comprehensive term, weed is a plant growing in a place where something is expected to grow. They are growing at that place where we are expected to grow what? Our crop. And they are growing there. So they are competing for nutrients and water. Accordingly, a sorghum plant in a black grain field is referred to as weed. So we are growing, this is our cropland, and we are growing black gram. Right? But some sorghum plants are also there. These are the sorghum. Right? So these sorghums are referred to as weed plant because what we are growing black gram. And vice versa. Suppose we are growing sorghum as a main plant. Sorghum. So this is the cropland for the sorghum. And we are having some of the black gram plant here. So this is not required this time, black gram. So this is weed. So now you understand what is actually the weed. What we want to grow and the unwanted plant that is growing there, that is called as weed. And that could be any other crop plant as well, right? So a weed may be defined as undesirable and unwanted plants growing out of their proper place. So this is not the proper place for the sorghum here. This is the proper place for black gram. This is not the proper place for the black gram here. This is the proper place for sorghum. Wheat can also be defined as a plant which grows voluntarily at a place where it is not wanted and grows at where the other useful plants grow. So they grow voluntarily by themselves, right? We are not growing these unwanted plants. They are growing in a cropland by themselves, means voluntarily, right? And where it is not wanted. So they are not useful at all. And plants are also considered as weed whose virtues are not known yet. Means why they are there. What is the benefit use of it? We do not know about that plant. So that plants are also considered as weeds. A weed is defined as a plant that forms the populations that are able to enter the habitat cultivated, markedly disturbed or occupied by man, and potentially depress or displace the resident plant population which are deliberately cultivated or of ecological or aesthetic interest. So we are going this is our cropland and we are going a resident plant population. That means desired crop. Any desired crop that you are growing here, that is called as resident plant population. But one of two different plant that is not required here, that also grow by themselves. Suppose A and B plants are there like this, right? So they get enter in this and they also grow. So what they are doing, they are competing for the sunlight, nutrients present in the soil, and also for water. So that much amount of sunlight, that much amount of nutrients and water is occupied by this unwanted plants, right? So that are also called as weeds. Controlling composite culture of weeds in the crop field is difficult task since it is governed by the host of factors, namely soil, temperature, rainfall, relative humidity, age of weed flora and their composition, distribution and polarity, formulation and chemical nature of the herbicide. So controlling the composite culture. So now we are talking about how to control these weeds. That is called as weed control. And why we want to control these weeds? Because these are harmful for our crop plants, right? Our crop will suffer. So we have to control this. And controlling is a composite culture of weeds in a crop field is difficult task since it is governed by the host of factors. There are many factors that also promote the growth of the weeds. And those factors are also promoting the growth of our crop. So there will be a competition between them, right? So it is required to control these weeds, right? For what they are competing? They are competing for soil. They are competing for the temperature. They are competing for the rainfall, means water. They are competing for the relative humidity, right? So all these are the competing factors. Age of weed flora is also one of the factors that is required to if you are going for the controlling these weeds, then we need to know whether these what is the age of the whether it is an annual or perennial type of weeds, right? So that is very, very important to know about the weeds. Similarly, affected is the herbicide selectivity to the crop, which is based on the plant, soil, environment and herbicide interaction. Now it is very easy to use herbicide to control the weeds. If it is affecting the weeds, then it may affect our crop because our crops are very sensitive. So it can affect the crop also, right? So it is similarly affecting is the herbicide selectivity to the crop, which is based on the plant, soil, environment and herbicide interaction. In the crop field, except some fodder and forage crops sown by the broadcasting, the composite weed population usually becomes higher than the respective crop density on the constant area basis. So it occurs only sometime that the weeds are greater in number than the crop plants. So it occurs sometime only, otherwise their number is always less than our crop plants. Winter season generally encounter less weed problem than wet rainy seasons, and it is hardly rain during winter, right? So in winter season we see less number of weeds. Why? Because there is hardly rain in winter, and rain is very, very important for the growth of the weeds, right? So, and the surface few centimeters layer of soil which contribute maximum towards the weed germination during the wet season and remain relatively dry. So in the rainy season, what happened? The soil is comparatively wet if we compared to the soil that is present in the winter season. So what happened at that time? At that time, weeds are not able to grow in winter season. But in the rainy season, lots of moisture, lots of water is there, and that is very helpful for the germination of the weeds. So weeds get easily germinated in the rainy season and they get established, whereas in winter season, due to the less rainfall, they do not germinate and we can find less number of weeds in our crop field. As a result, weed population and the density remain lower and the number of flushes of their germination gets reduced in the winter than wet season. However, the severity of the competition, irrespective of the season, depends largely on the relative difference on the time of emergence of crop and weeds and their population size. Right? So the competition, irrespective of the season, if the weeds are there, they will compete with the crop plants for the sunlight, for the nutrients availability in the soil, for the water. Right? So they will always compete with the crop plants. The various practices used to control or eradicate the weeds may be grouped into three generally categorized are prevention, eradication and control. So these are the three different methods actually: prevention method, eradication method and control method. How to prevent the growing of the weed? If the weeds are grown, right, then how to eradicate them? Second level. Okay, and how to control if they are not eradicated, this step is missed, then how to control their growth. So all these methods we are going to study. Prevention, eradication and control are the fundamental principles of the weed control. So we are studying principles of weed control. So what are the principles? Prevention, eradication and control. These are the three fundamental principles of the weed control. The first basic step is to prevent the infestation of weed in a locality in order to avoid their further spread. Let us prevent the growing of weed in our cropland. So that is the first basic step, is to prevent the weed control. This is the first step, and this is actually what we are doing. We are preventing the growth of weed in our cropland. If one fails in preventing the spread of the weeds, eradication step must be adopted. Okay, we missed out the prevention of the spread of the weeds. Now what we do? We can adapt eradication method. They got established. Now let us eradicate them. Eradication is limited on a very small scale and only when suitable methods of complete weed removal are available, as eradication is 100% control of weed along with root system and other propagative parts. So this eradication method is adapted when you are sure that it is going to remove 100% of this weed. There should not be any root system left in the soil or any propagating parts. Suppose the rhizome. Okay, all these things should all be removed in the eradication method. Further, if one fails in preventing and eradication, so we missed out the prevention method, we missed out the eradication method. Now what to do? Now there is a technique, then weed control method must strictly follow, in which the objective is to bring down the weed population. So we missed out preventive method and eradication method. So let us stop the growth of a weed by following the control method. Next method is the control method. Prevention is preventive method. So let us discuss in detail one by one. Preventive method. Prevention is concerned with the measures taken to prevent the introduction and or establishment of the specified weed species in an area that are not currently infested with these plant species. So if we know the plant species that we are growing in our cropland, we generally know that what we are growing, right? And if any other species that we have not seen in our cultural field, right, then that is considered as a weed, and that we have to prevent. So such area may be local, regional or national in size. So what the area we are considering, that could be our small cropland. If any crop, along with the crop some other plants are growing, so that plant be considered as a weed in a local environment, or in a regional environment, or on a national level also. If any weed plant that is not common grown in our country, then that is a national problem. And again, at the regional level we can say that, and again we can say at the local level also. It also includes farm hygiene that prevent every year production of seeds, tubers and rhizomes of weed species already present in the farm, right? So it includes farm hygiene. Farm hygiene is very, very important. You have to maintain your farm hygiene. How? All the seeds that has been produced should be removed. So suppose in this particular cropland you have grown wheat in one season, right? And now you are growing another crop, suppose rice, and along the rice wheat is also growing, because some seeds are present in the cropland. Then what will happen? So that wheat plant will be considered as a weed, right? So the production of seeds, the tubers, the rhizomes of wheat, that should be removed away before growing a new crop, right? So that species should already present in the farm, that should be removed. Hence, any physical or chemical method adopted with the main objective of not allowing the weeds to set viable seed is to be considered a part of prevention. So basically that is prevention method, that you are not allowing any other seeds to grow in your cropland. Any other means you are allowing just one selected crop in your field, and after that no other seeds you are allowing to grow in your cropland. No other rhizome or any other perinating structure of the plant will be present in the cropland. So that you are actually seeing, and that is called as prevention method. No weed control program can be successful if adequate preventive measures are not taken to reduce the weed infestation. So weed infestation will be there if you are not controlling properly by the prevention method. So the following prevention measures are suggested. What are those? Use of clean seeds. Use of clean seeds means the seed should not be attaching some other seeds, other small seeds. Sometimes it happen, right? If you are having a bunch of seeds like this, so it should be a crop A seeds. Suppose these are crop A seeds, and along with some B seeds are also present. So that you have to remove out. So that is called clean seeds. Use of well rotten farmyard manure. Farmyard manure, you have to use that, guys. Crop management practices should be followed. Arresting weed seed movement. Keeping non-cropped area clean. Not only the crop area, non-cropped area means, suppose this is the agricultural field, so there are some non-crop area also, that should also be cleaned out, because if some wheat plants are there, they are growing, they will produce seeds, and that seed could be dispersed here, and that wheat plants can grow in your cropland also. So these areas should be cleaned. Uprooting weeds before flowering. Before flowering, you should take out, if any wheat plant is still growing, then you have to take by that wheat plant by uprooting. Root should not be left in the soil. Use of clean farm machinery. The machinery which you are using, it should be very clean. Seed certification, that these seeds are free from any type of diseases. Weed law, and keeping vigilance. So all these things you have to follow in the prevention method. You are taking lot of prevention steps, that we are not allowing any type of weeds to grow in this cropland. So all these things you have to take care. These comes under the prevention method. Now comes the eradication method. Second type, eradication method. Now we missed out the preventive measures. What we can do? Weed eradication is the complete removal of all live plant parts and seeds from an area. Eradication includes the destruction of seed as well as the vegetative propagules. Means you are not just taking out the plant. Suppose the rhizome is left in the soil, then it will give rise to a new plant. If the tuber of the weed plant that is still left in the soil, then it can give rise to a new plant. Creeping roots and bulb, that if it is present, that should also be removed. So whole plant along with the rhizome or the tubers or the creeping root, everything that should be removed. That is eradication of the weed. It is taken to the belief that once weed is eradicated from an area, it will not reappear unless reintroduced. So once it is eradicated, it will not be introduced unless it is reintroduced to the cropland. Eradication is very difficult to achieve or hardly achieved in the terms of complete exhaustion of seed bank and the vegetative propagules of the wheat from the soil. So it is quite a difficult task that you are taking out all the wheat plant manually and no tubers is left in the, suppose the wheat plant is having the tuber. So how can you be sure that any tuber is not present in the soil? You have taken out all the things, right? So it is quite a difficult task, right? Jayakumar and Jagannathan 2019 reported that eradication is the ideal method of control, rarely achieved. It can be rarely achieved that no weed can be reintroduced. It can be introduced because sometimes the rhizome can be left, sometimes the other perinating structures of the weed that can be left. If you are taking out the weed plant also, then also the seeds of that weed can drop in the soil, and at the proper availability of the water, they can regerminate and that can give rise to a new weed plant. So this is rarely achieved. That's why the Jayakumar and Jagannathan has said this. Eradication infers that given weed species, its seeds and the vegetative parts have been killed or completely removed from a given area, and that the weed will not appear unless reintroduced in the area. So this is the eradication method. Practices aimed at the eradications are often used in the high value areas such as greenhouses, ornamental plants, beds and the containers. So sometimes this method has been practiced for the greenhouse, for the ornamental plant growing and also for the containers. The greatest difficulty in achieving the eradication is the killing of the weed seeds and the vegetative reproductive parts present in the soil. So this is quite difficult, that you are destructing the vegetative reproductive part, either the vegetative part or the reproductive or even the seeds of the weeds, right? So this is quite difficult task. Now the third type is the control method. Weed control includes many techniques used to limit weeds infestation and minimize the competition. So this technique attempts to achieve a balance between the cost of control and crop yield loss. But weed control is used only after the problem exists. So now we have a problem of weed. What can we do? We can follow control method at that time. If you have missed out the preventive method or the eradication method, then you can follow the control method. So weed control techniques have been adopted widely because control is the easiest thing to do, is usually effective. We have to control. Now the weeds are established in your cropland. So you can control the growth. You cannot eradicate all the weed plants, right? So what we can do, we can at least control the growth of these weed plants. Control encompasses those practices whereby weed infestations are reduced but not necessarily eliminated. Weed control is a matter of degree ranging from the poor to excellent. In generally, the degree of weed control obtained is dependent on the characteristic of weed involved, how the weed is controlled, right? How we are successful in controlling the weed, that depends upon the characteristics of the weed involved and effectiveness of the method that we are using to control that weed, right? Two things are important. First thing, the characteristic of weed, and second thing, what method you are using to control these weeds growth, right? So that is very, very important. The various methods of the weed control are grouped as cultural method, mechanical method, biological, and the chemical method. So we are going to discuss one by one. First one is the uh, points to be considered for the successful control. Okay, so these are some of the points that should be followed for the successful control. What are those? Habitat of weed plant. What is the habitat of the weed plant? Life cycle of the weed, susceptibility to the chemical. So what chemicals that the plant is susceptible. So that is very, very important, because if we know that, then we can control the growth of the weeds. Dormancy period of the weed seed. What is the dormancy period? At which season or which time the seeds of the weeds are dormant. Resistance to the adverse condition without losing viability. Method of weed reproduction, how the weeds going to reproduce, by what methods, and what are the dispersal agencies that weed seeds are using, right? So all these things are very, very important to know about the weed control. So all crops grown in the fields are subjected to weed competition. So weed competition is one of the most important limiting factor in the crop production. Successful elimination of these factors is directly linked to the production efficiency of the farm. So if you know the limiting factor of the crop production, then you can control the growth of the weeds as well. Weed problem vary from one crop to another. It is not for same for all the crops, right? So it vary from crop to crop, from one region to another, from one farm to another. In one farm a particular weed cannot grow, but in this you are growing the same crop in those two farms, but in one farm the weeds infestation is easy, but in the another it is not. So it depends from farm to farm, it depends from the region to region, and it depends on crop to crop. Similarly, the weed spectrum is heavy clay soil is not always the same as in the lighter soil. Weed growth is more intensive in warm, humid and high rainfall areas than in hot, dry and low rainfall. So it means that they grow in warm area, humid area and high rainfall area very easily, but the weeds are not able to grow in the hot, dry or low rainfall areas. However, since weeds can adapt even to the extreme climatic conditions, they are always competitive with the crop plants in any situation, but still they can grow in any circumstances. Weed management is the combination of the practices by which weed infestation is kept in the minimum for successful and profitable crop production. The concept of weed management can be applied as a coordinated approach to a single weed species or a complex several species. So basically we must follow the weed management program. This program is not only controlling one weed species, in fact it is controlling the complex, that is several species, right? So this is quite important to note down that these weed management program is very, very effective and that should be followed. Weed management is a system approach whereby whole land use planning is done in advance to minimize the inversion of the weed in aggressive forms and given crop plants a very strong competitive advantage over the latter. So we must follow in those cropland where the weeds are in great problem. The weeds are actually the great problem for the farmers. So there we must follow the weed management program, right? Objectives of the weed management program. Why we are following this? The primary objective of the weed management system is to maintain an environment that is as detrimental to weeds as possible by employing both preventive and control measures through the use of physical, cultural, and biological and chemical method, either alone or in combination. So we can apply some cultural method, we can apply some physical method, or we can also apply some of the biological methods. So these methods we are going to study in a separate topic. The main aim of the weed management is to manage the vegetation on land and water bodies in such a way as will encourage the growth of the plant beneficial to human. It will only encourage the growth of the plant that is beneficial to human and will suppress the remaining unwanted plant. Suppress remaining unwanted plant, that means it do not allow the weeds to grow. It only allow, and what you are controlling, you are controlling the water bodies, you are controlling the vegetation on the land, right? The long-term objective of the weed management is to avoid or reduce any adverse environmental impact of control method and prevent the buildup of any one weed species. So this is the long-term objective of the weed management, that it must reduce any adverse environmental impact of control method, and it can prevent your method should be like it must protect the growth or prevent the growth of the number of weed species. It should not be very specific that this weed management program will control only this particular weed. No, your weed managed program should be like that it should control the number of weed species growth, right? Prerequisite of the successful weed management program: one must gain knowledge of the biology of the weeds before choosing a system of control. So we must know what is the weeds, how they grow, how they compete, right? So we must know all the knowledge of the weeds. The nature of weed problem must be surveyed in the target area. So if we are growing in one area that is having a very specific climate condition, that is very having the water availability, right? You all know about your cropland, right? So according to that, you must survey that which are the weeds that are very easily get established to such environmental conditions, such availability of water. You must know about that. Weed control measure must be planned for the whole farm and just against weed in a field. Weed control system must follow a program of weed prevention measures. So these are some of the things that we must control. Cultivating fast growing crop varieties that serve as a better competition with their leaf canopy, covering the ground rapidly to enable them to smoother the establishing weeds, right? So we must grow fast growing crop varieties. We must select the crop varieties that are quite fast growing. So they grow fast and they can compete well with the weeds, and they do not allow the weeds to grow, because when they are well grow, the sunlight will not be available to the lower growing weeds and they will die, right? So this is very important point. Preventing the weed seed production in the cropped and non-cropped areas. We must prevent the production of seed by weeds. This important measure prevents the infestation. The persistence of the annual and biennial weeds depends upon their ability to produce seeds to reinfest the soil. So if you control the production of seed by weeds, then basically you are controlling the growth of weeds, right? One could eventually eliminate most of the weeds if the seed production in weeds are avoided. Yes, if the seeds production of the weed is avoided, then you are actually eliminating most of the weeds growing in your cropland. This could be achieved by cutting, mowing, killing of the weeds before they bloom and set seeds. So you can remove all the weeds from your cropland before they bloom or before they set seeds. Besides proper placement of fertilizer, better irrigation practices, high plant production per unit area, and the proper crop rotation prevent the successful establishment of the weeds. And intercropping with the quick growing crop smoother the weeds interspaces of the row drilled crops. So this is also one of the important things that we can use to control, that is intercropping with quick growing crop, right? So this is all about the principle of weeds. We will have some lectures on the control method. Okay, till then, thank you very much.